I'd like to call the Muhlenberg Township Board of Commissioners meeting for Monday, August 15th to order. All please rise for a pledge of allegiance and remain standing for a memorial moment. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a memorial moment for Frederick Stankiewicz, who passed away on July 21st. Frederick was the father of Police Administrative Assistant Lloyd Ferraro, and a memorial moment for Barbara Isaac Brown, who passed away on July 16th. Barbara was the mother-in-law of Planning Commission member Eva Isaac. Thank you. Marcy, for the minutes, there was an executive session held before by the board before tonight's meeting to discuss some personnel matters. Also for the minutes, Commissioner Imhoff was unable to attend due to an illness. First, we do have two new fire police that are going to be sworn in this evening. So if they can come forward, Jesse Drive Elvis and Joe is here. Come on up, guys. All right, guys, so you repeat after me if you raise your right hand. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support, obey, defend the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that I will discharge the duties of my office with fidelity. So help me God. So help me. Thank you, guys. Welcome, and thanks for volunteering your service for the township. Next, we'll turn it over to our solicitor, Mr. Sentley.
Thank you, Mr. Kowski. This is the time that's been set aside for a conditional use hearing for Sheets Inc. For adaptive reuse and redevelopment of a convenience store. This hearing was advertised in the Red Eagle on August 1st and August 8th. And notice of the hearing was mailed to the applicant, its counsel, and neighboring properties on August 3. In addition, notice of the hearing was posted at that property. We always ask the
Thank you from Steely on behalf of Sheets Inc. I do have a packet of pre-marked exhibits to try and streamline everything. I do understand the interest of brevity, so we're gonna hand those out real quick, and then I'll just do a quick introduction and introduce my witness. So again, Ambrose Hines for Sheets. The project here involves the property the northeast corner of Fifth Street Highway and Avenue Ave. It's in the C2 zoning district. The applicant is requesting an adaptive reuse and redevelopment. The existing store that is application will be rebuilt under this proposal. Because of the current site configuration and current site conditions, there are a few modifications that the underlying zoning requirements in order to allow for the redevelopment. The adaptive reuse and redevelopment provisions of the zoning ordinance allow for this board to make those modifications, dimensional modifications, as part of the conditional use. So that's what we're asking for tonight. Development, who did the site design, engineering on the project, as well as Bob Franks from Sheets and Eric Mouse from TPD, who did the traffic analysis for the redevelopment. So I'd like to have my witnesses sworn in, begin with, and then we can move forward.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
So we'll start with Mr. Franks. Mr. Franks, just introduce yourself for the record, state your name and
Robert Franks, engineering and permit project manager for Sheets.
how long have you been in that position?
I've been with Sheets for 38 years, managed store design for our architectural group for 20 plus years, and then the last 11 years doing the engineering and permit.
Familiar with the property that's subject to the application? And if you could just identify what I've marked as exhibit A1 in the exhibit packet.
Yeah, so A1 is our current lease agreement with Ezra Inc.
And Ezra is the record owner of the property.
That's correct.
And so Sheets has the right under that agreement to develop and use this site.
That's correct.
And how big is the property that's
It's 1.19 acres.
existing store there? And how long has that store been there?
Since 1996, July, I believe.
And was a land development plan obtained in order to get that original approval?
Yes. it was.
And is that what's been pre-marked as exhibit A2, that prior land development approval?
Yes, sir.
And at the time, the property in 1996 owns 3, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when that store was built, it complied with the setbacks and impervious coverages that were applicable to that zoning district, is that correct?
That's correct.
And has the store undergone any renovations?
It has, most recently in 2019, we put a 377 square foot addition on for indoor seating.
And at the time of that renovation, had the zoning district already been changed to C2 for the property?
It has.
The current lot size, setbacks and parking requirements were all in place under that prior plan.
That's correct.
And that renovation just was a minor site plan renovation.
That's correct.
And were any additional parking spaces added to the project at that time?
Yes, there was one additional parking space.
And what is Sheets now proposing with respect to the site? Just generally.
Yes. We're proposing to close the existing store. So we would close the store, demolish the existing store, gas canopy pumps, remove the tanks, and then reconstruct a new facility with gas pumps, new tanks, new pumps.
And as part of that, we are requesting a adaptive reuse and redevelopment of the site.
That's correct.
And you authorize the filing of the application that's been included as exhibit A3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I'm just gonna refer you to A4 now, which is exhibit, which is the existing conditions that we identified. Shown there. Is that the existing conditions of the site? That's correct. And with respect to the area and bulk regulations, there are a number of items that are marked as existing non-conforming. Can you just go through and
So the minimum lot size, yeah, 1.12 acres. Existing requirement is 2 acres. Max was 85.7%. 60% is the requirement. On front yard setback. We have off of Fifth Street, we have 56.9 feet. And the gas canopy is 26.7. And on Bellevue is 42.4 feet. Minimum side yards requirement is 30. The eastern side yard is 19.8. 12.1 for the dumpster. And the northern side, the building is 29.9, and the dumpster is 7. Minimum off-street parking. We have 4,700 square feet. Yeah, that's required. So we have 34 spaces provided. And then minimum parking, access drive set. I think it's 15 feet, and we have 2 feet on Fifth Street and 0 on Bellevue.
and that's just the distance between the parking lot and the right of way.
Right-of-way line.
And so those are all existing conditions and existing non-it's as to be noticed. And with respect to exhibit 85, just identify this for the board.
So these are the proposed rebuild plan.
You don't have to go through this, we'll go through those with, but is it your understanding that this adaptive reuse is an allowed use by conditional use?
That's correct.
And the underlying district, the use as a convenience store is also allowed by conditional use, is that correct?
That's correct.
And we're proposing a redevelopment of the existing.
Correct.
And just in terms of what the store would look like, exhibit A6, this is the typical elevation would be for that.
Correct. Yes. So we have, this is our newest design, which has stone and brick on all 4 sides of the building, metal on it. There's a cupola where the main entrance is located.
And so this, is this just the typical elevation, or is this what this sheet would look like?
This is what this sheet would.
This would look like. And the front elevation that's shown here is
This would face, well,
Bellevue.
so this top elevation faces.
So Fifth Street, sorry.
Yeah, so it faces Fifth. The cupola would actually be at the corner here. This is,
Oh, here. And then the last elevation that we have here in exhibit A6.
there's a little bit of, this is a prototype rendering, but shows what the building facility would look like as well as the new gas canopy. new gas canopy will no longer have the red backlit vinyl. It'll be a truss style.
And in terms of the size of the store, how big would this store be?
$49.97.
And how many pump islands?
It'll be 5.
And that's what's there today. And the height of the canopy is,
It varies. So the low side would be 18 feet tall and the high side would be 21 feet.
and the area of the canopy, we'll get to that, Terry. The store has brick and stone veneer on the sides. Yep. And the exterior lighting, is it your understanding that would be compliant with what's required by the ordinance?
That's correct. We completed a luminaire plan. That's been, I think, reviewed by the township.
And with respect to the pumps, would there be space on site for stacking?
That's correct.
And with respect to the request, the modification to reduce the number of parking spaces, in your experience, have there been any issues at this site with the parking as it currently stands? And would you expect that the 31 spaces proposed and shown on the proposed plan would be sufficient for your needs? That's all the questions I have for this witness. Unless the board has some questions.
Anybody on the board have any questions?
I have one. The dumpster was moved. Was that at the request of the neighbor?
We had an original layout where the dumpster was extremely close to the property line. And so through the review process and some comments from the township that we received, we did move the dumpster further from the property line and added some additional shrubs and stuff to screen it as well.
Anything else from the board? Does any member of the public have any questions? Please look. Okay, thank you. And see your next witness, please.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Sure, Terry Dero.
And who are you employed by?
I'm employed by Integrated Consulting,
And what's your role?
the senior project manager and partner.
And just a little bit about your background. What's your
Sure. I have my engineering training certificate, and I also have been doing land development work for over 15 years.
And were you design on this project?
Yes.
And you heard the testimony of Mr. Franks. Would you agree with his assessment on the existing conditions plan, which is Exhibit A4? That these are existing non-conformities shown in the area in both regulations.
Yes.
And the zoning ordinance does allow for conditional use approval for an adaptive reuse, correct?
Correct.
And also allows for modifications for dimensional requirements.
That's correct. Yes.
So just walk through real quickly on Exhibit A5, how the site would be changed from what's currently there.
So pretty much everything from the right-of-way line of the 2 streets in will be demolished, as Bob mentioned earlier, and rebuilt. So the driveways will maintain in their existing condition. We will not be modifying those or going back to PennDOT for any revisions to the HOP permits as their existing permitted driveways. Within the site, we obviously will have the new building, the new canopy, and parking will pretty much stay in the same location that it is in the current day. We'll just be modifying mainly the portion or the row of parking along the eastern property line. That's to accommodate location of the dumpster. There's an additional air machine that was added on this side. And as mentioned earlier, we put additional screening along the eastern property line as much as we could, given the fact that there's a large overhead utility line that runs a portion of the way into the site and has a large guy wire that connects down to it. So that's pretty much the.
And that modification with respect to the screening was at the request of the plan. condition?
That's correct. Yeah, we had later screening shown, pretty much just headlight screening, which would be comparable to what there today. We took the feedback from the first planning commission meeting at the second planning commission meeting, provided the additional screening. Totally adjust the concern.
And the 3 spaces that are removed are currently just to the north of the 5 spaces that are shown here.
Yes,
And those spaces would have been facing the neighboring property.
that's correct.
And with respect to the store itself, it is being shifted back toward the northern part of the property.
Yeah, I believe that we actually have I think it's the same distance as closest point to the northern property line, but 1.1 foot closer in the northeast corner.
And that relates because the property isn't exactly rectangular.
Exactly, yes, correct.
And have you submitted plan already for this
We
plan?
have, yes.
And have you gotten feedback from the planning commission?
Correct, yes, we attended the first meeting, received feedback, revised our plans, resubmitted, came to the second planning commission and received recommendation, or I should say, conditional recommendation.
And as part of that, stormwater plans were submitted.
Correct, yes.
And does in your opinion, does the plan that's been presented now comply with the regulations related to stormwater?
It does, yes.
And with respect to the specific conditions, standards relating to convenience store use, generally compliant, other than the requested conditions or modifications.
Yes.
And the area of this canopy is less than the store, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Apply the lighting plans.
It will, yes.
And is that lighting plan that was submitted from that included as exhibit A7?
That's correct, yes.
And that is consistent with what is required under section 355. Code.
That's correct.
So let's get a real quick through the dimensional modification request that we're going to be asking for, starting with number 1, minimum lot size.
So yeah, the existing, or the minimum lot size required to be 2 acres, where as in the existing condition, we're at 1.1 acre. In terms of the impervious coverage, the maximum coverage, the requirement is 8.7% currently there on site, and we're gonna actually be reducing that down to 83%. So we're adding some additional grass area and less impervious with the new store layout design. We also have minimum front yard setback. They are 56.9 and 26.7 for the building and the canopy. They're going to be increased to 69.2 for the building but from increase from 26.7 to 26.9, so just a very small increase there. And the Bellevue Avenue, 42.4 for the canopy, and the proposed condition 40.9. Eastern side yard is going to go from 8 to 18.7, from the dumpster from 12.1 to 8. The relocation on this side. In the previous version of the site plan at our first planning was about 1 foot off of the property line. So kind of angling and shifting it allowed us to get an additional 7.5 meters. In terms of the parking, we have 34 spaces in the station, and that is there with 41 being required. I'm sorry, 40 spaces being required, 41 being provided if you count the 10 parking spaces that are actually at the canopy itself, or under the canopy itself, I should say. And then the parking setback along the access drive, currently it's at 0 feet off this, so a little bit more with resetting the curb line there.
And one comment about it, what's between the curb line, the parking lot, and the actual cart ramp? What's actually in that area?
Grass landscape area, and then there's an existing sidewalk along Fifth Street.
So the parking lot's not directly on
Correct.
the street.
Correct, exactly. It's the increase over here. A little bit more.
And it's just taken from the right of way rather than. And so there are certain conditional uses. Your opinion, is this plan consistent with the zoning ordinance and comp plan?
It is, yes.
And is this use suitable and consistent with the policy at this location? And is that because the property is currently being used for that use already?
Yes.
Would this rebuild adversely affect the neighbors or residents in the area? And pedestrian sidewalks are already provided around the site, is that correct?
That's correct. We actually are not impacting the sidewalks. We are providing two handicap accessible ramps on either side of the Bellevue Avenue entrance. So those will be rehabbed and fixed up a little bit, as well as a comment from the engineer, I believe, or with the county. We are providing access from that existing sidewalk into the site to safely get pedestrians into the middle of the site from the sidewalk.
And has additional screening been proposed as part of this?
Yes,
Has this been reviewed by the fire marshal?
the project has, yes.
And have you had any feedback?
Yes, we received a letter from the fire chief that they have reviewed and did not have any comments.
And is there existing emergency water service available for firefighting purposes? And the proposed use will continue to utilize public water and public sewage.
Yes.
And this is proposed to be a 24/7 operation.
Yes.
And you touched on it with the stormwater plan, but is there any increased stormwater runoff that's going to be created by this?
No, it actually have a decrease in impervious area, generate less storm.
And finally, is it anticipated that this rebuild will result in any additional traffic to the site? Well, that's all I have from the state.
Does the board have any questions for this witness? Does the public have any questions for this witness? Yes, you'll have to identify yourself for the record. Come up to the microphone.
My name is Brenda Huey. My husband Barry and I own the Bellevue Gem and Rock Shop, which is adjacent to this property. And we haven't seen the plans, and I'm not sure if this is when I should bring up some of my concerns. But we did have questions when you're speaking about being, what does that mean?
That's an excellent question, and we actually had addressed that. Actually, it was one of the exhibits I missed. I'm sorry. So this was exhibit A8. And Terry, we just run through what you proposed.
Absolutely. So right now, as you probably know, there's a couple bushes or shrubs along the road here, here, in between this property and the property. So what we're proposing to do, we had our in-house landscape architect take a look at what we could provide here that is a level of screening from headlights, being more dense screening, as well as doing some larger arborvitae plantings along the dumpster area to hopefully provide as much screening from sound and from sight as possible in that particular area.
So, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I just wanted to point out, and you had mentioned before about the power lines and the limitations that we have in terms of providing screening. Touch on that.
Yes, yeah, as you can kind of see in this, is you're very well aware, I'm sure, of the existing pole that's there, it has a large guide wire that comes down. So that little gap you're seeing in the arborvitae here is where that guide wire hits the ground. So there'll be a taller planting or screening in here, as well as infill by these northern bayberry bushes, which will provide a good screen onto your property as well.
Okay, so the way the design is now, Barry, can you come up here a minute, please? The way it is there, you're encroaching on our property tremendously. So your property line is only
About a foot
a
off.
foot off of the current parking area.
In the-
So,
Yes.
yeah. So the way the picture is, and I understand that, you know, pictures can be deceiving, but, yeah, it doesn't seem like, it just seems way far over, like the guide wire for the pole is on your property, yes. And I guess where we're at right now is, there is a daily trash problem with sheets. Our property is constantly loaded with trash.
Not to our property.
Yes, but we get the brunt of it. I have pictures, if anybody is interested in seeing, just over the last 6 to 8 months. And we had been in talks with the district manager back in as late as August of last year about putting up a 6-foot vinyl privacy fence, the whole line of the property. And at that point, they told us that they were anticipating this rebuild and that would be strongly considered during the rebuild. Because shrubbery, it looks great in the picture, but unless you're gonna put in 20-year mature shrubbery, it's not gonna look like that when you put it in. And it's not gonna stop the trash. I mean, several of these pictures show the trash in the shrubbery. And it was there for days until I called. And I call and someone comes out and picks it up, but by then it's blown all over our property. You know, we can't get it all. I work a full-time job, Barry has the shop. And, you know, then he runs over it with the mower, or your guys run over it with the mower. And it's just, it's terrible. And in my opinion, shrubbery isn't gonna do the job. A 6-foot privacy vinyl fence, when they quoted it last year, your Mr. Brubaker, I'm not sure if he was the engineering permit project manager, said it was going to be $7,500 to $100,000 to $8,000. And it was refused at that time, which is fine. But in this email from your district manager, he told us it would be strongly considered when in the rebuild. That's not acceptable to us.
Sure. Might be getting out of the
Yeah, I'm sorry, I
No,
didn't
it's
know when I was
okay.
supposed to come up.
It's okay, we can
So,
address
I didn't know
that
what
question.
you meant by screening, and that's what I thought it meant.
That's what it's kind of,
Yeah, so we, I know Brent. I didn't get your message from Brent. I don't know how long.
The email is back from him. I don't know.
But anyway, we have no issue doing the fence. I think we went with the shrubbery and the landscaping might have been a suggestion. But we have no issue doing the fence. I don't know if that causes setback issues because it's just.
Well, I mean,
that doesn't matter, but
it's,
either here nor there.
it's something that could be addressed.
Yeah, we would absolutely do the
Okay.
final fence.
Well, based on the current setback for the parking lot, at that time it was discussed, and I believe they contacted the township manager about putting the fence on our property, because where the current parking lot is, you couldn't put a fence on your property line because, well, you could, but trucks and cars would, smash into it. That's off the table at this point for you to put it onto our property, because if you're doing a rebuild, then you would have to redesign, you know, or.
Right, and right now we have 4.1 feet between our property line, our surveyed property line, and the closest point of that row of parking.
So that's being changed from what it currently is.
Well, there's actually a couple less parking spaces, in this area here, so it's a little bit further, maybe 4.5 at the most between that northern parking space and here.
Okay.
What we will have to take a look at is, again, the guy wire, and how that angle of the guy wire and how a fence would have to kind of manipulate around that. So we would just want to take a look at the proximity to.
Right, because currently on the, what I guess would be, at this point here, from your property to our property is like a foot. At least what I have.
Well, this is a survey plan, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the survey is showing it as 4.7 from the curve of the parking lot.
That's not what our survey plan has. Yeah, and I actually said that to,
Can I ask that you discuss this with the engineer outside of the hearings?
Oh, okay.
okay,
And we'll
okay.
hear your concerns and.
Okay.
This is the first time we're here, so.
I
I don't know what we're supposed to do.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
I believe you're done with this.
I am, and thank you.
okay.
One final witness, Eric Mounts. Eric, can you just state your name for the record and your.
Eric Mounts, MOUNTZ, work with traffic planning and design.
And Mr. Mounts, what's your qualifications?
I'm the regional leader for transportation planning. I have I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Pennsylvania, as well as a certified professional traffic operations engineer. Have been with TPD for over 20 years.
And then you're familiar with the project that's being proposed tonight?
I am.
And did you do a traffic analysis as part of that project?
Yes.
And is that what's been identified as exhibit A9?
Yes, it is.
And so if you could just run through your conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. Traffic on this one's pretty straightforward, so I'll keep this brief. With the rebuild, the current access locations to Fifth Street Highway and Bellevue Avenue are not changing. I have full movement on Fifth Street Highway, right in only driveway, and a full movement driveway to Bellevue. The existing driveways to Fifth Street Highway are permitted with PennDOT. From a traffic generation perspective, we would fully anticipate that this store will be comparable to the existing store, given the fact that the square footage of the store and the number of humps are generally consistent with the existing condition. The letter we submitted did look at traffic generation for the increase in 200 square feet in accordance with the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual. If you look at that 200 square foot increase, it would, the straight calculation would be approximately 10 to 12 additional trips during your peak hours. So very negligible. Like I said, the rebuild is generally intended for aesthetic purposes and bringing the store compliant with current standards. We did reach out to PennDOT just to confirm that they will not require any additional permitting, given the fact we're not modifying driveways. That was done at the end of July. We haven't heard back at this point, but I will tell you, we do have two nearby examples of similar rebuilds, one in Onalani, one in Shoemakersville, both along Route 61. Both were similar in that they had existing HOPs and there were rebuilds with no changes to the driveways proposed. And PennDOT did not require any additional permitting for those projects. We expect a similar response for this project.
And in your opinion, do the current access driveways provide safety and access to the property?
In my opinion, they do.
Do you anticipate any impacts related to traffic from the proposed rebuild?
I do not.
Thank you. Board have any questions for
Mr. Mouse, just a quick question. There was a station about the southern entrance along Fifth Street. I know there was a discussion with the Planning Commission about any possibility of closing that particular entrance. Was that ever discussed any further than that particular meeting?
It was not. It's a permitted driveway with PennDOT. From a circulation perspective, Sheets prefers that. It provides direct access to the fuel canopy as opposed to having to bypass that location if it was closed and circle back through the parking areas where you have a lot of moving vehicles So the preference is to keep that location such that you have direct access to the fuel canopy.
And that's entrance only?
Correct, right in only.
And can we just talk a little about, is there signage or something that will be on the property to direct exit to the northern egress? Is there signage?
If there isn't, we will certainly, it will be added to the plan, but I believe there is signage.
Okay, I think that was the concern, not so much, there was concern about automobiles and the amount of speed reduction as you're right after you're coming through the intersection. I think there was also concern about cars trying to make a right-hand turn or left-hand turn out of that particular, I think signage would suffice. Great, thank you.
Also, board has questions?
Just real quick questions for Mr. Frank. In my part, construction's all finished.
If all would go well, it would take us about 5.5 months, 6 at the most.
And just from the construction itself and the time of day is to do a rebuild like this, is the heavy equipment housed on the site, or is it come and go daily?
It was housed on the site.
Can we just answer questions just for the general public as to why Sheets wants to do this? I mean, you have a building that was recently modified, receives a lot of traffic. We just talked about why you want to take it down.
So what we've done over the course of time is we've done all these individual remodels. Probably the inside design for the employees may not be as efficient as it should be or could be with our newest design. And when we evaluate this facility, we know that we want to be here long term. So hopefully another 20, 25 years. So the intent is, okay, we've kind of piecemealed this together to kind of close it, rebuild it, replace all the equipment. So all the equipment's brand new. We get the updated brand look that we like to have, especially with like the canopy. The employee areas become more efficient, and then the customer areas actually become increased. So there's a lot more room for the customer circulation as well. Again, it's, the existing facility probably lives its life before we get to another 25 years. So, yeah.
And this is the third, would this be the third site in the county that's being remodeled this way? Or
I would think so. Yeah, we have a total of 40 stores that we identified that were similar in size, similar in age. Decided that we want to take those projects and do the same thing. So we have a program for 40 of those stores. Thank you.
Any other questions from the public, Frank? Unless the board has something further, I think we can adjourn the conditional use hearing.
Just, or just move my exhibits.
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, I have no objection here.
Thank you.
If the board so inclined, it could consider a motion to grant the conditional use as requested by the application, or deny the conditional use as requested by the application.
I would make that motion if we can accommodate the neighbors. I mean, with that fence, I don't think it's out of the question that they want to keep the trash on their property. But if we can, I really appreciate Sheets. We have a fifth street revitalization program going on. It's always nice having a new, bright, shiny building in our district. And I appreciate, I know the board probably appreciates the same thing. We want to make Fifth Street look beautiful and the pictures are really beautiful.
So that's Is that a motion to grant the conditional use approval conditioned on reasonably acceptable buffering between them and their neighbors?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll second.
Any further questions or comments?
I just want to comment on the process itself. I'd like to just give a small shout out to our planning commission on this. They asked a lot of tough questions. And I'd like to thank Sheets for going back applications. I know the screening was a big topic. And thank you for revisiting that again. You know, we did not hear from the party owner about the trash issue at that time. I don't know if we received complaints into the codes department about it, but I'd like to thank at least the district manager for looking into it. Thank you again for revisiting that, but you know, I was able to attend a couple of those meetings, and I thought the planning commission did a very thorough job in asking questions, which makes our decision a lot easier when it comes to us. That's my only comment.
Any further questions or comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those if any.
Yeah, so let's clear the agenda. Go ahead and take it down.
So I think we need a motion to approve sheet store 226 rebuilding and development plan condition on compliance with SDE's most recent review letter, including waivers granted.
Move. Second.
Questions or comments on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those if any, the ayes have it, so ordered. Thank you. Good luck. Now I'll turn the meeting up.
This is another conditional use hearing for your commercial drive-through establishment, which is a Starbucks. And it's Reading Mall LLC. This hearing was advertised. Hopefully, I can give you your first name.
Oh, can't wait to wait for this one.
Say,
Like,
start over again when you're ready.
sorry, they only gave me the one notice.
I didn't get very far. This is a conditional use hearing for a commercial drive-through establishment, which is a Starbucks. The owner's name is Reading Mall LLC. The hearing was advertised in the Eagle on August 1 and August 8. August 3rd, the property was posted and notice of the hearing were mailed both to the applicant's counsel, and the neighboring property owners. I know that Mr. Cuss is going to do a faster hearing than the last. You're up, Mr. Cuss.
Thank you, Mr. Sedley. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Mark Cupp here on behalf of Reading Mall LLC, 217 North 6th Street, PA 19601. Good evening, everybody. I know you just sat through pretty much exactly what we're going to do next. Briefly, if I may, Reading Mall is at this point looking to redevelop the adaptive reuse concept you just heard about again ad nauseum. And I mean, no disrespect by that. With respect to the former Cuppy's Java Joe's, if you remember where that was located. Ironically, I conducted that hearing for that in a joint zoning hearing / conditional use hearing, not in this building, but in the prior building many moons ago. So it's almost nostalgic, if you will. That being said, I have with me this evening two representatives of Reading Mall. One is Mr. Rob Johnson, who is on my left, and then Chris Stratton is also here as well. We've got a couple of documents to share with you. I'm sure you're all familiar with this property, but look, very briefly, we're talking about the Reading Mall. This property has been through various iterations with you gentlemen and ladies. And there's been some demolition done. Rob's going to talk a little bit about that, but we're going to move into a quick amendment to the application, which I think was discussed with Jim, if I could, just with respect to the actual acreage on the application itself. So if we could respectfully have the application amended to indicate that the gross acreage for the entire mall is 52.332 acres. And the proposed property that we're working, we're asking to subdivide and redevelop, would be 0.54 gross acres. Slight tweaks from what's in the application, but just for the point of clarification. So with that being said, we have submitted plans to the planning commission. We have worked back and forth with Mr. Chuck Hess, with Jim and with your staff, attempting to basically put a new and shiny, I heard those words, we do need conditional uses, and within those conditional uses, we also have some modifications that we're also asking for. Our list is going to request some zoning relief, also has the waivers with respect to the subdivision and land development ordinance, and some stormwater requests that are all kind of lumped into that. I'll present a second document to you with respect to that relief, and Mr. Johnson will go through it briefly. So with that said, I do want to point out that since any of you may have been to the planning commission meeting, and we have resolved the minimum square footage, so we now are providing 25,000 square feet for the minimum of 25,000 square feet, and we'll resolve the, I believe it's the rear yard setback.
Rear building.
So with that being said, we'll go ahead. If I can have Mr. Johnson sworn, please.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Mr. Johnson, you've been sworn. Are you a representative of Whole Property Group, AKA Reading Mall, as well as Gemini?
Yes, I'm the Vice President of Construction for Whole Property Group, President of Gemini Construction. So I've been there since 2006.
So currently, you are the representative here on behalf of Reading Mall, proposing the redevelopment.
Yes.
Fair. Could you just give us a little bit of history of your background with respect to Reading?
So history with Reading, 2.332 acre tract of land, formerly known as the Reading Mall, sitting right here across Fifth Street back in 2016. Our goal at that time, we bought it in a declining state. And so obviously there are a number of ways to redevelop or, I would say create a catalyst, so to speak, on what to do. What the avenue that was chosen was to demolish 8.4 acres of facility to create blank canvas, so to speak, for new development as sort of the initial catalyst, with the hopes that people will see the new lighting, the new touches that we've added to the facade, and the new access roads in between, along with keeping some of the existing tenants we could as a initial step. And then our next step is to see what we can do to get national tenants and or other tenants to revitalize that area. We're lucky that we have what we're proposing as a 25 square foot state-of-the-art Starbucks facility to go on the out parcel, as previously mentioned, formerly occupied for a coffee shop.
So just to be clear, Mr. Johnson, you did say 8.4 acres have been basically demolished of buildings. Is that fair?
Yes, at this point, 8.4 acres.
I'm sure everybody's aware of that, but when you think about that number, that's significant. Mr. Setley, exhibits okay to mark A1?
Yes.
All right. All right, Mr. Johnson, I've showed you what we have marked as Exhibit A1 for purposes of identification. The first page of A1, is that in fact a letter of representation or authorization to represent Reading Mall and within the entire development process?
Yes.
If you flip to the second page, is this in fact your deed, I should say, the Reading Mall properties deed to the premises?
Yes.
And then if you work backwards, the last two pages generally, the second to last page of Exhibit A1, Mr. Johnson, is in fact an aerial view of a part of the property. Is that right?
Yes, it's got the backup of the property, or the, should I say, the half of the former mall.
And so that gives you a view of what currently exists about today. Is that right?
Yes.
And then if you look to the right of that picture, you'll see the Wells Fargo, right?
Yes.
And then as you start to move to the top of that page, you'll see a gray area in between the Wells Fargo and the Applebee's. Is that in fact the property we're talking about?
Yes.
And if you flip the page to the last picture, is that in fact a better depiction of the parcel we're talking about?
Yes.
So we've been through the planning commission, we're proposing to buy and land development, correct? So
That's correct.
so the conditional use hearing is essentially twofold. One is for the drive-through, is that right? And the second is for the adaptive reuse, that's your understanding.
Yes.
And I would, obviously, the commissioners can see this very easily, but this property has physical constraints, obviously. You start with North Fifth Street, correct?
That's correct.
And then you have the drive aisles and access points to the mall.
Correct.
And then as you move to the left-hand, can't quite see it there, but there's also additional drive aisles and access.
That's correct.
And then as you move basically between the avenues, there's also another drive aisle.
Yes.
And so essentially, this is completely ringed in by existing access points, macadam, North Fifth Street Highway. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. We talked about total gross acreage being 52.332 acres. We talked about the history demolition. Now, respect to the proposed plans, which are on your left. Is this the essentially the overall site plan?
Yes, this is the overall site plan with North Fifth Street being here, the existing entrance drive being at the top of the page, and the existing circle, basically circle drive around the mall property.
So what is depicted, I guess we better mark that as exhibit A2, if that's okay, Mr. Sullivan. So, Mr. Johnson, just for reference, I have marked the site plan two for purpose of identification that has been generated and or created by and or your consultants.
Yes.
So you've already essentially just kind of laid out the property. I think everybody here is pretty familiar with this piece of property. Starbucks layout.
Yes.
And you have worked with Starbucks to bring them to the community first and foremost, is that right?
Yes.
And secondarily, this is essentially the most
Yes.
So this is kind of what they're willing to. So we need a conditional use for the drive, all right?
That's correct.
We also need a conditional use for the adaptive reuse. Is that- Johnson, I'm going to show you what the purpose of identification as exhibit A. If you could take a look at that for me briefly. Absolutely. And so in order to assist with the hearing, Mr. Johnson, we prepare basically a list of the requested modifications that we're seeking under the adaptive reuse provisions of the conditional use.
Yes.
All right, and we'll just like, I guess, Mr. Satin, I can make an offer of proof, or we can run down these, whichever you prefer.
I think that the commissioners can browse through this and tell them to read through it.
Okay. So I
Will be included in the record as an exhibit, so.
So essentially, everything we're running through here, Mr. Johnson, are the requests for relief that we've requested either A, from the zoning orders, is that right?
Yes.
Or secondarily, modifications or waivers with respect to the land development plan. The stormwater issues, is that fair as well? So I'm more than happy to address any of these items if the commissioners would like us to. We can certainly take a minute and peruse that if you'd like to do that as well. And I'd even suggest if Mr. Bobick has any questions he'd like us to get directly, we can do that as well. I realize it's already been a fairly lengthy with respect to the hearings.
If you want, we just take a minute, let the board read through these modifications. Any concern with any? Any commissioners have any questions on these modifications? You get it.
Mr. Johnson, can we just talk for just a moment? And I know, again, I was at planning commission meetings, but can we just talk to the general public? Why this particular location, with a request for a number of variances as opposed to anywhere else on?
So Starbucks, their site criteria is, they have a high standard for their site criteria, requiring close ingress and egress from their facility, as well as, prominence to the major road, in this case, North Fifth Street. And so those, with respect to the rest of the property, they don't have the prominence that this corner does. And we also feel that it is also sort of a benchmark to set the tone for the rest of the redevelopment.
Thank you. George. Not sure if I'm missing this here or not. I know that there was a lot of discussion regarding the closure of, as you're coming southbound on Fifth Street Highway, the closure of the exit off of Fifth Street, the one that now takes you down right past Applebee's.
Correct.
So that lane, that still will be removed. And the farthest south exit, the one at the traffic signal, that will remain.
Correct.
Okay. There was a lot of concern about the closure of and the loss of that first exit. And I just want to talk here, I thought it was a very good conversation. The concern wasn't automobiles stacking on Fifth Street because the second ramp still remains. You don't lose any of the exit lane. And you can still make a right-hand turn. The traffic light does not govern that right-hand turn. The concern was what happens to the traffic, and I'll refer to the picture. What happens to the traffic when they actually make the exit and get down to the bottom of the hill? They do not have a stop sign. So traffic coming off of Fifth Street makes either a left or right as they do today. The concern was what happens to the cross traffic. And I'd just like to talk to that a little bit because there are no changes being made to that particular intersection. I voiced a concern then, and I would just like to have it discussed now for the Board of Commissioners. What types of steps we can take to make sure that traffic won't back up on Cross Street as it either exits the bank or if it's coming into the mall property heading northbound off of Fifth Street. I hope I didn't lose you in all the directions.
So you're correct. Your other mission, we discussed how this intersection functions and some of the current concerns, which I think were also, I guess Mr. Hess was here and he was able to speak to them. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion that, put signs here to sort of slow and yield here, but we didn't want to stop the traffic completely as it comes in on North Fifth Street to keep the traffic moving again, not to back it on the North Fifth, but to keep the traffic flowing as it is today. Now, with respect to the bank that sits here and this intersection here, there are a couple of lanes that are going each direction. And so we did discuss the idea of a potential pass-through lane on this side against the inside, I guess, the mall, against that curve there, allowing that to continue forward. However, that does create, as long as we have a secondary lane here, that works. And to kind of restrike that, I believe we've got enough room to restripe to allow this lane to continue through.
Okay.
The one coming from the bank obviously couldn't because you've got these two modes of traffic, which are a continuous stream of traffic.
And how would we convey if we feel that there's an issue that we would need to come back to the hall and talk that through?
Well,
Simple phone call?
Well, and I'm gonna leave that to y'all to figure out. However, we did discuss the fact that as redevelopment occurs, again, we talked about reconfiguring this intersection, and obviously at the time we continue to redevelop, we'll obviously, hopefully be back in front of everyone here again, and at that time address, is there a better way to circulate that traffic pending the exact layout of the continued redevelopment?
My understanding from stuff that I've seen and been involved in, Commissioner Rogers' point is, in order to attract further development there, we're going to put something in that we have to just take out where it can be. Is that your point where we wouldn't want to restrict something, we just have to change because another company could come in and develop on that particular plan? Would that be a fair enough statement of not altering the traffic routes too much?
Correctly.
Yes.
If I understand what you're Chairman is saying. So essentially, the idea is that modifications as you go don't make a whole lot of sense as you look at it at the end result.
Sure.
Is that if I think I
Yeah.
follow what you're getting at. So, I mean, as redevelopment occurs, it would probably make the most sense to work through that intersection or changes at the end of the redevelopment as opposed to in stages as you go along. I think that's what these.
Yes, and I would say as we get any redevelopment within this specific area, it would be the right time to do that.
I would say this, Mr. Commissioner Lurch, if you have concerns, certainly, a phone call is a bad way to address them. I know nobody is shy on this board, so certainly.
No, we're not. No, and I don't want the loss of the current exit lane to be a stopping point for the project, right? I like the project. I like the fact that Starbucks is looking to move in. I like the fact that, we've talked about this before, that development begets development. And when other developers are looking and see move forward, that's good for us. A little friendly competition between you and Cheats and, the world, I think that's a great thing.
Make you out, right?
My concern, and we discussed it, and I want to thank you for discussing it again, is just kind of looking down the road. Certainly, the traffic today, I don't think that there's an issue, but as development comes, and hopefully Starbucks will be very big, concern is that there is a lot of traffic that is northbound on that road. They're going to have a stop sign. We're going to have, and it may not be all day. I'm just talking, peak hours, first thing in the morning, 6 or 7 a.m., or 5 or whatever. Then suddenly there's a lot of traffic coming off Fifth Street, and that's continual movement, and people coming north are going to have stops, traffic backs the other way. So as long as it's on the table and we're discussing it, and there's a nod to, looking at down the road, if it becomes necessary, at least we have the conversation now.
Mr. Johnson, I guess I would just ask you one follow-up question then is obviously, this is not going to be the last time you're in front of this board of commissioners or in front of the planning commission, correct? That's the hope, exactly. And so you want to have a design and a traffic flow that is as efficient and safe as it can possibly be, I think, fair?
Because it ultimately ties to tenants seeing that, hey, the property and the entrance drive can handle their businesses.
And so with respect to Commissioner Lurch's questions, I mean, certainly you keep an open mind and open dialogue and certainly an open line of communication. Is that fair?
Yes.
Excuse me. At the planning commission meeting, there was discussion about the sidewalk. I can see no need for the sidewalk. Just one in front of the building, maybe not, but for future growth, there was some consideration, maybe an alternative way to fund another sidewalk maybe across that lane. Is that proposed?
Well, we did discuss the sidewalks, and we offered that we would contribute to the, I'm not sure the exact name of the fund, beautification or sidewalk fund, that's going on in Reading that really has areas that have existing sidewalks that can be tied together. Obviously here, as you mentioned, the grade and this area of the site, there's no sidewalk to either side. And so the benefit is none. So utilize those funds for where they could be. And then as we talked about, again, as the ongoing redevelopment continues, how best to tie those sidewalks in so that we don't put sidewalks in now. We, those are worked out as we go down the road. Yeah.
So yes, we are willing, Commissioner Wolfinger, to make a contribution. We would like to have the ability to just discuss and negotiate that with township staff. I'm sorry.
You may continue.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So essentially, at this point, Mr. Johnson, just following up on what we've talked about, the relief that we're requesting is all contained within Exhibit A3, is that right?
Yes.
The only item that I think that was not listed in there was a request for relief from section 310.14, which was the actual waiver for preliminary, because I think this has been submitted as a preliminary / final plan, and I don't know if that's ever been acted on. That would be also part of your request for relief, is that right?
That is correct.
And so obviously, gentlemen, as you read down through the list, there are zoning items highlighted. And then as you move into the 310 sections, those are all subdivision and land development waivers as well. So just making sure everything gets into the record with respect to the conditional use. And then also the stormwater requirements as well. So based on everything that you're familiar with here, Mr. Johnson, do you believe that what you're proposing to do development-wise, traffic-wise, causes any negative impacts to anybody, any surrounding property owners?
No, with the surrounding property being similar uses, and this being a great area of potential redevelopment as well as the existing, tenant spaces, North Fifth, and in the area, we feel that it's going to complement the area and be a good thing for the community and for the property.
So this adaptive reuse and the commercial drive-through would obviously be an improvement to the existing situation that's out there. Is that fair?
Yes.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add for the commissioners?
No, we look forward to continuing this and redevelopment in forward.
Thank you. Commissioners have any other questions for this? Does this public have any questions?
What does it look like?
Can you identify yourself?
My name is Charles Shaw. And of course, it's important that they show the commissioners the diagrams and everything, but we in the audience can't see anything. I can show building.
So the facility,
Mr. Sedley, would it be your preference to go off the record for a minute? Let Mr. Shaw just take a look
Yeah,
at the
let's do
plans.
that.
Whatever you want to do.
I'm good with that.
So if you want to just take a minute, we're off the record, so Mr. Shaw might take a look at that.
Mark, to make sure. Sure.
Yeah, I think that-
I have a better idea where it's located.
So here, gotcha. So that's the Shaw picture. So this is right, this is right. Get a chance to see what you want to say there. See, drawing. Yes. Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay. So we can go back on the record.
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. So Mr. Shaw, just to be clear, you had raised some questions about the drawings and the design. Do you have any further questions from Mr. Johnson?
No, I don't. I wasn't sure how it would be located.
Is there any other questions for this witness? Hearing none?
Members of the commissioner, we do have Mr. Mounts on standby to testify if there's any interest in hearing very briefly from him, and assuming there is none, we will go ahead and move the admission of our attorney. We would rest.
Yeah, I believe the commissioners are satisfied with the traffic aspects of this development.
We appreciate that. Move the admission, we rest.
I'll need a copy of A2 with file.
Do you want the whole set of plans or just that one?
Just that one. And we have no objection to the longer to this.
Thank you.
We'd like to hold the motions individually or all at the same time.
I think that you can, push would be conditional use approval for the drive-through facility and reuse and redevelopment within the meaning of the zoning ordinance. And in connection with the adaptive reuse and redevelopment conditional use, to agree to all of the modifications on exhibit A3 and the modification permit with the land development plan to be presented as a preliminary final plan.
Questions or comments? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those of any, the ayes have it, so ordered.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can, if you want to, use the same.
Did you just?
No.
Which one? Three. Okay, so then I need a motion to approve the Reading Mall LLC subdivision plan conditioned on compliance with SDE. Most recent review letter and all waivers and modifications granted.
Second.
Questions or comments? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those if any, the ayes have it, so ordered.
Thank you.
I need a motion to approve the Reading Mall LLC Starbucks Land Development Plan conditional on compliance with the most recent review letter, including waivers and modifications granted.
Second.
And further questions or comments? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those if any, the ayes have it, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move into the first public portion, Chief Moyer, do you want to say something?
I know we've been back and forth on run cards for the fire department. The run cards have come before the board. We're looking to make modifications to the run cards. Also, we redistricted the township with some of those areas with the run cards. Some of our concerns at this point is we want to make sure we get those cards updated as soon as possible. Is a concern on those cards that we added were non-hydrogen areas. We want to add tank areas in those response areas. So we beefed up our cards. We have commercial occupancies in there now as well as occupied commercial properties, high occupancies. So those are concerns for now our first priority, obviously, is life safety without a ladder. And we're relying on liveness and to come, those front car